So we'll ask each of you to share a little bit on that particular topic of your own coming to your own ordination and what that was like, and then we'll anything that you would like to impart to us along those lines, and then we'll have time also for questions. Thank you.
Well, I don't really know what to say. There's so many stories, and I can talk a little bit, but then, if you have specific questions. So my story, I guess, is a little bit different than some people's, because some Western people who get ordained had, some life experiences prior to that. They may have had a career. Some were even married, some even had children, and my interest in Eastern Asian religion started when I was a teenager. And at that time, this was back in the late 60s, there weren't many books available, but I managed to read a few books and get a little bit of idea about Buddhism and Hinduism. I couldn't really tell the difference at that point in time. But I just felt very drawn, very attracted to the Eastern or Asian religions. And and I even felt there was one book that really had a powerful impact on me. It was called Autobiography of a Yogi. I don't know if some of you read that. It's about real people, yogis in India. And when I was reading that book, it was just so fascinating. And I had this strong feeling come up inside of me. That's what I was supposed to do with my life. And it was really scary. It wasn't like a conscious, deliberate thing. It was just coming from deep down inside. But I didn't know anybody. Nobody in my family or circle of friends was into that kind of thing. So it seemed like a rather scary thing to do. But that grew more and more as time went on. When I was in university, I met my first Buddhist, a woman who was a disciple of Suzuki Roshi, who had just passed away prior to that. But she gave me his book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. So that was my very first real kind of Buddhist book. And I remember just reading it and getting really spaced out because I didn't really understand much, but I really liked it. There was something, it really had some effect on me. And then I read Be Here Now. I don't know if you're familiar with that book, Richard Albert, Babaram Das. And that was again like, wow, And it was just these signals were coming, calling me to India. So I didn't even finish university. In fact, I wasn't really interested in having the normal life, a career, the American dream, having a house in the suburbs and a husband and kids and a dog and all that. That was totally not my interest. So I just felt really, really drawn to Eastern religions and a contemplative life. So I started traveling, and eventually I made it to India after many adventures on the way, traveling overland through Central Asia, which probably isn't possible now. But anyway, I finally got to India, and I went straight to Dharamsala because I had heard that the Dalai Lama was there, and that was one of the things I'd been interested in, was Tibet and the Dalai Lama. So I went to Dharamsala, and as soon as I saw like monks walking around with these robes on, I just felt almost like home, and I felt this is it. This is what I'm looking for. And I started going to classes at the Tibetan library, and there weren't many Westerners in those days, and it was very low key, very not built up like it is now. Alex Berzin was there, Brian Beresford, John Lando, Stephen Batchelor, so some of these, and so I went to classes for about 5 months, and I was very happy there. But then I had to leave India because at that time the law was that if you were a foreigner, unless you came from a Commonwealth country, I was very envious of the Canadians and the Australians and the New Zealanders, but I was American. So we had to be out after 6 months. We could only stay for 6 months, and then we had to be out for 6 months. And I really didn't want to leave, and I was even thinking of staying, but you get thrown into jail if you don't. And I didn't really want that to happen. But then I heard that in Nepal there were Tibetan Lamas giving teachings. So I decided to go to Nepal. And on the way, I went to Bodhgaya. Everybody in Dharamsala was going to Bodhgaya anyway, because the Dalai Lama was giving the Kali Chakra initiation. Probably the first time he gave it out of exile. I don't know. And that was very interesting because there was no English translation. I was just sitting there for 3 days, surrounded by all these Tibetans and listening to Tibetan. And I was sitting near Alex Berzin, and every once in a while he would, say something like, "Oh, this is what's happening," but it was not at all like a complete translation. But I was really impressed. I mean, I had been right from the beginning when I went to Dharamsala. I was really impressed with the Tibetan people. I just found they were so kind and so generous, and even though they were living in really difficult circumstances, they were refugees in one of the poorest countries in the world, but I just saw so many wonderful qualities in them, and that was one of the things that really drew me to this tradition, seeing that this is what it produces in people, and the teachers, of course, are wonderful beings. So sitting with this large group, I don't know how many tens of thousands of Tibetans, and they were generally quite calm and peaceful compared to, say, a football game or a baseball game here in America. I thought, wow, these people have really behaved themselves. And so respectful and so on. Anyway, so those are some of the adventures. And then I went to Nepal, and I attended my first Kopan course. Actually, some of you have probably been to Kopan Monastery, and now it's very built up. It's almost like, I don't know what to call it, almost like a little city on top of the hill there. But back in those days, there was just a few very old, kind of run-down buildings, and there were 30 young monks, Himalayan monks, living there, and a group of Western people, about 12 of whom had become monks and nuns. And I thought about becoming a nun, when I was in Dharamsala, but I thought it would be too hard. There were only about a handful of Westerners in Dharamsala who were ordained, and they were all in different places doing their own thing. And I thought, I couldn't do this on my own. I wouldn't be able to do it on my own. But when I got to Kopan and I saw there was a group of people under the guidance of Lama Yeshe and Lama Yeshe, and they were, living together, cooking together, praying together, doing things together, I thought, I think I could do it here. So I think the idea of starting to get ordained became more concrete in my mind. And then I requested the lamas to be ordained. And it's kind of, I think looking back, I was a little bit crazy. I was only 21. And it was only 9 months between the time I first started studying Buddhism and the time I got ordained. It's almost like a pregnancy, like. But really, I think that's way too fast. Way too fast. I wouldn't recommend that. But on the other hand, I survived. So, the conditions were not easy in those days. We didn't have a proper shower, a proper bathroom. We just had these, outhouses, big open pits with straw. Remember those? And the bathroom was just this little, if you wanted to take a bath, it was this kind of room, and you get a bucket of hot water and go in there and splash yourself, and that was it. And not at all, luxury. But I didn't mind. I was just so happy to be learning the Dharma, practicing the Dharma, and becoming ordained. So then shortly after I got ordained, that was in May of 1974, we had a Vajrasattva retreat, 3 months. That was the first of a yearly Vajrasattva retreat at Kopan. And that was a very interesting experience. And the other day I was thinking about this one incident that happened during the retreat. Kopan was almost totally deserted at that time because the young monks, the Himalayan monks, had gone up to the mountains for the summer, and most of the other Westerners had left, and there was just this small group of, 10 or 15 of us who were staying there and doing the Vajrasattva retreat, and a few people to cook and help us out and so on. So one day I was, I think it was after lunch, and I was walking back from the dining room to my room, and I happened to meet these 3 people who I'd never seen before. two of them, anyway, we started talking. They wanted to talk to me. They wanted to ask me questions. So it turned out two of them were Hollywood ladies. One was actually an actress. I'd heard of her before. Very beautiful, blonde Hollywood actress. The other woman was a little older, and she was the editor of a magazine, like a Hollywood magazine that talks about people and this and that. And the man, the other person with him was a man. He was a very, very tall, handsome Bhutanese man. He looked, quite well off. So they were asking me all these questions, and then the woman who was the editor of the magazine said, "I would like to interview you for my magazine." And I went, "Wow." And I said, "I'm not quite sure if that would be okay. I'd have to check with." There was another nun who was looking after the retreaters. She'd been ordained maybe 1 or 2 years before, but she was the senior most Western nun. And I thought, well, I really should check with her first. And so they said, okay, we'll come back tomorrow. And so I went to speak with Anila Ann. You remember Anila Ann? Yeah. So she was looking after us, and so I told her this story, and she said, she kind of looked very stern, and she said, Lama Yeshe doesn't like reporters or journalists. He doesn't like journalists. So I took that to mean it's probably better not to do this interview. And also thinking about it, in the middle of a retreat to be interviewed for a magazine. Anyway, the people never came back. But for the next week, my mind was just totally berserk with just the thought of me, with my fancy maroon and gold robes in the pages of this Hollywood magazine. And I knew it was 8 worldly dharmas. I mean, Lama Zopa Rinpoche had been drilling us, again and again, day after hour, about the 8 worldly dharmas. So I could see very clearly it was all the 8 worldly dharmas, but it just really pushed a button in me. So I'm really glad that interview never happened. But anyway, that was a funny story. So, yeah, I have many other stories to tell, but I don't know what you're interested in hearing. So maybe I'll let Venerable Chodron have her talk, and then if you want to ask questions later, I'm happy to.
I think most people kind of know my story, so I don't think I need to tell you much about that. But maybe I'll just talk a little bit about the conditions. Yeah, I had also gone overland to India, which I don't think you could do now, and then come back to the States. And so I met the Dharma in the U.S. because somebody put a flyer in a bookstore. Yeah, I've looked. There's a few like small things that have happened in my life that have, looking back on now, have been led to major directions that I've gone in, and this was one of them. A flyer in a bookstore. So Thubten was giving a talk about Kopan, and I went there, and then. I had already been to India and Nepal, and then the lamas were coming for a talk, for a retreat. So I went to the retreat, and then after that I went to Nepal. And, Kopan, it was up on top of the hill. Getting up there, if you were able to find a taxi, you were lucky. Most people walked because there just wasn't, there weren't vehicles to take you up there. There wasn't any running water. There were people who, everyday Nepalis, who carried the water, with a pole on their back and 2 big clay or other kind of buckets. And they would go down the hill to the spring, fill the buckets up, walk it up, and put it in these big urns. The bathroom was like she described, with this kind of straw around it near 2 boards that you took very good care to step on. Because if you missed, it was at your own peril. So I arrived a little bit before one of the meditation courses, and I had gone to the course in California, so I came to Nepal, already knowing I wanted to ordain. I mean, it was crazy because, I didn't know the Dharma very long, and I came and I was like, I want to ordain, and all I wanted to do was hang around the Sangha. So I went to where the nuns were, and Elizabeth was sewing curtains, and so I sewed curtains for the nuns by hand. I forget sewing machines. And Sangye Khadro was there, and she was this very kind of ephemeral, quiet, angel-like creature, kind of floated through things. Yeah. It took me a long time to talk to her because
I thought talking to people was just samsara.
yeah.
Sorry, but just attachment.
And I adopted that same viewpoint because I remember after I got ordained, staying at Kopan, and Dr. Aid was talking. One of the monks was talking with somebody about. He had a Time magazine or a Newsweek. I don't know how long ago because they were very precious. So we took whatever we got. It was a few months old. So he was talking about some article in the Time magazine to some other monk, and I remember standing there and going, oh, these monks are so samsaric. Don't they listen to what Lama says about samsara and the danger of samsara? And, it's like, I admire them, but I don't know these guys. Yeah. So, so I hung around the Sangha a lot and, and wanted to ordain. And then they kicked us out of Nepal. You were there then. And I had hepatitis at the time. I was recovering from hep. And so I traveled with the Sangha overland. I think we went to Patna. Yeah, and then we took buses and trains. Anyway, we got to Dharamsala. And I was with the Sangha, and they kind of carried me the whole way, because when you have hep, you're really sick. And got to Dharamsala. And then I wasn't ordained yet at that time. And so they lived in this place called, came to be called Injigompa. It was at the top of the hill, close to His Holiness's temple. It's where, some of you have been to Dharamsala, where there's the Baksu Hotel, and then on the other side, when you go down, there's where the nuns are staying, and all those many, many hotels. So it was just right at the top there, and it was made of mud and brick. Yeah, that was where the Sangha lived, and they felt very fortunate because there wasn't much other accommodation, and this Indian lady kind of opened the place, and so they lived there. I went down to the library, and I was studying at the library at the time. So the library rooms were concrete, and in the summer, concrete in the summer is interesting. Monsoon summer, it absorbs all the water, so the inside of your concrete room, you see the water kind of climbing up the walls, and everything smells like mildew and mold. Your mattress, your cushions, everything. And I think at Inchigompa it was the same thing. But like Sangye Khadro said, we were all very happy, even at Kopan before we left, there was that food was I just remember going there as a layperson, and so because we were Westerners, we had a really good dinner, not like what the little monks ate. We had a good dinner. We had a piece of bread and a scoop of peanut butter. The little boys didn't get the scoop of peanut butter. We did, because we were Injis, and we would complain if we didn't get something nourishing. But that was dinner. Okay. You know, the Tibetans were really poor. The Injus who came, you know, we were all kind of, you know, didn't have much. We were living hand to mouth. After we got up from Freak Street, in Gopon, remember Freak Street? Yeah. And yeah, so it was like that. We were poor. The Tibetans were poor. India and Nepal were poor. But those of us who met the Dharma and followed it, we were so happy. You know, I just also remember being very happy during that time. Yeah. So, yeah, so stayed in after we got kicked out of Nepal, stayed in India. Then it was time to go back to Nepal for, oh, no, then I did the Vajrasattva retreat. You were one of the leaders, weren't you?
Yeah.
At Tushita, you and, what's his name? He's at,
Tony?
no, he was at Vajrapani, and his hairline was like
Steve.
this. Steve, yeah. So they were leading it. Yeah, and it was at Tushita during the monsoon. And Steve and Losang Nima, who was the Tibetan director of the center at that time, they didn't get along very well. And Lama Yeshe had very strict rules for the retreat. And if you got up in the middle of a session and left, you couldn't count any of the mantra that you had said. So some mornings they made suji, this kind of cereal that was mostly water. So everybody, of course, in the next session had to go pee-pee in the middle of the session, which meant we all lost our mantra, which was a great catastrophe. Because we were all, you know, kind of figuring out how many more sessions and how many more mantras per session and, yeah, doing all the math. And so we didn't want to lose any. And so I remember Stephen, you know, going in to talk to Losang Nima, you know, please don't make suji because everybody has to go pee-pee in the middle of the session. And it was a big explosion, and they're yelling at each other in the kitchen, and, you know, and we're going, oh, Vajrasattva. Yeah, my husband was at that retreat. We had, you know, we were in the process of separating at that time. That was an interesting experience. Yeah. Yeah, and then after the retreat, we went back to Kopan for the meditation course. And I wound up working in the office. That was my job. So greeting all the people who came up the hill and, you know, please have a cup of tea and pay 3 rupees for your cup of tea. You know, it was a very awkward position of, you know, charging everybody because the monastery needed the money. Yeah. Yeah, so anyway, your turn.
Oh.
The conditions at Kopan hadn't improved much since we left and then came back. Yeah. Freak Street. Okay, it was down in the middle of Kathmandu, and it was where all the hippies, the foreign hippies, went. Okay, so freak, you know, that was what everybody called themselves. Hippies was outdated, everybody was freaks. Okay, so it was Freak Street, where you went to either get marijuana or chocolate cake. Yeah, so that, you know, there were a few places that made some version of Western food, not exactly. And then there were drugs. And so that's where most people went when they first went to Nepal. This was the late 60s, early 70s, mid 70s, whatever. And then people found their way up to Kopan after that. So you had all sorts of people kind of arriving at Kopan in various stages of clarity and stupor. Yeah. And I remember people kind of saying to Lama, Lama, can you meditate and take drugs on the same time? And Lama would look at us and say, you're already hallucinating, dear. You don't need to take drugs. He was really not at all for it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think everybody who came was a hippie. For example, Alex Berzin. I mean, when I got to Dharamsala, I don't know him that well. Maybe he was a hippie. But anyway, when I got to Dharamsala, the Tibetan library was already well established. But I think it had only started a few years earlier. And what I heard was that it was Alex who requested the Dalai Lama to have some kind of, like a school where Western people could study Tibetan Buddhism. Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, I think it was His Holiness who arranged for this building to be built and classes to be taught, and classes in Buddhist philosophy and also Tibetan language. And they were starting to publish books in English. So that was in the early 70s. Well, if you want to know the story behind that, there's a book called The Laudo Lama, which is it's a biography of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, his previous life and his present life. And that kind of tells the story about how Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa had their first Western disciple, who was Zina. I never met her. She passed away before I got there. Zina Rachevsky, who was a Russian princess, I think. That was the story I heard. I think her family were royalty, and they escaped from Russia due to the communist takeover and settled in New York. And apparently she was quite a, socialite. This is one part in the book that is just so funny. So she was really interested in meeting Tibetan lamas and learning Tibetan Buddhism, and she met these Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa, and started studying with them. And they were staying together in a house in Darjeeling, I think. And Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa would get up very early and do their prayers and so on. And then they said Zina would get up, a few hours later. And when she first got up, she looked like a 70-year-old. And then she'd go into the bathroom, and after 2 hours, come out, and she looked 16. So, hair, makeup, everything. So, anyway, so that was the first. And then I guess she had a lot of friends. So she started inviting her friends. And she's the one who really organized the buying of the land, which became Kopan Monastery. Apparently it formerly belonged to the royal astrologer. The royal astrologer. It's up on a hill in the middle of Kathmandu Valley. And so they bought that piece of land and then, developed it into both a monastery, but also a place for Western people to. But apparently, the first people who came were pretty wild and into drugs and drinking and partying, but there were serious people too. It wasn't, not everybody was like a hippie. But I think, there were just a lot of Westerners going to India and Nepal in those days and encountering the lamas and being interested and asking for teaching. So it sort of happened in that way. And the lamas, of course, being very compassionate, giving the Dharma that they knew. That's how I understand.
Not all the hippies were wild. Okay. And I think different lamas had different reactions. Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa, somehow, I got the feeling it flowed quite naturally for them teaching Westerners. Other lamas, you could see it was kind of, what are these creatures? Yeah. Yeah. So it depended a lot, I think, on the personality.
I just remembered a story, Khensa Jamba Tikchok, okay? He came to, I mean, his first contact with teaching Westerners was in England. I was at a center in England, and he came over to teach us. And it was on the invitation of Lama Yeshe. And after being there for a couple of months, one day he said that when he was in India, before in a monastery in India, and he saw Western hippies, and he, just looking at them, he thought, oh, these people could never learn the Dharma. Like we were lost cases. But he was pleasantly surprised when he came to the center in England and teaching us. He said, I can see that you really can learn the Dharma. And he was actually really impressed with the questions that we asked, you know, and the intelligence that we had. So, yeah, so there may have been some lamas who just thought we were hopeless, you know, but yeah.
But it was also interesting listening to teachings, because Lama and Rinpoche spoke some variety of English, you know, and you could understand them, but the other Tibetans didn't. So then you had translators of varying degrees of ability, and some very good, you know, like Losam Gyaltsen at the library, and others where you got a few words here and there. And I remember years later talking to one of the people who was a monk, Peter Kedge, at Gopan at that time, and we marveled that we stuck it out there, because Geshe Jamba Teptrop was teaching us Abbey Dharma. You know, we were new. Yeah, Geshe Jamba Gyaltsen was teaching us Abbey Dharma, with Thubten Chodron translating when he was just learning. Were you there at that time?
No.
Yeah, and I think you had gone to UK already. And, you know, and it was like a difficult text. He hadn't studied it. We didn't know what in the world was going on. And, you know, so we heard a little bit here and a little bit there, and Geshe-la just kept teaching, and Thubten Chodron kept translating, and you know, and it was really amazing. And Peter and I were saying it's amazing that we all just stayed there and ate, you know, kind of soaked it up as much as we could get, considering how much was left out of the teaching, yeah, just because it was a difficult subject and the translator had knew, you know, some English, but certainly not the Dharma terminology.
But I think it's because of the lamas themselves. I mean, that's how it was for me. I just could see, I mean, these are lamas who had studied in Tibet, you know, the old school.
Yeah.
And that was tough. I mean, being a Buddhist, being a monk, being, you know, studying in Tibet was super, super tough. And they were tough people. So they were really, really just amazing qualities. I was just so struck by that. I think that's the thing that I just want to learn from these people. And even though the concepts were difficult, we didn't have the benefit of these nice Dharma books nowadays written by, you know, scholars who explain things very, very, very clearly. But there was just this hunger to learn from these amazing beings. And that they've got something inside of them that we want to know. So I think that's what kept us going.
Yeah. Because the teachers were really extraordinary. You know, we came along at the very end, I think, of a whole stream of really excellent old school teachers who in the beginning of the 80s, like the first 5 years of the late 80s, so many of them died. And, you know, we were just there at the tail end to learn from them. Yeah, and I think it was, like you said, that you could sense something incredible about these people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and when they spoke about, you know, the path, and you know, you thought, this is really possible. This isn't make-believe. And we were going to do it in that life. Yeah? You know, 3 years at most. Get that done, checked off our list, and then go on. We were very idealistic. Yeah, monastic training. Everybody got up early. Lama was very strict about things, and he wanted people trained well. So there was a daily schedule, and you got up and you did puja for about 2.5 hours in Tibetan, okay, with a little bit of Lamrim meditation in it. And, the whole day was involved. You had your pujas, you had some teaching, some study time, and then, of course, the offering service to keep the monastery going. Many of us were taught English, to the young monks. And Lama was very particular. Everybody had to go to the pujas, morning and evening meditation. Everybody had to practice to follow the schedule. And that was really difficult for some people, especially the ones who had been traveling for a long time and gotten up at 10 or 11 in the morning, and now they're ordained and they have to get up early. And so we had a gegu, the disciplinarian who would, get us all together. Yeah. And then Lama would teach us, Rinpoche would teach us. When somebody misbehaved, Lama let us know. And often during teachings or pujas, he would comment on something that was going on. And I remember some teachings, because Lama had this wonderful way of making us laugh at ourselves. I mean, he was so skillful to get us to relax and laugh at ourselves. But he also used humor to point out to us when we messed up. And so I remember some teachings where the Sangha and the lay people were there listening, and the lay people are laughing at what Lama says, and the Sangha is dead serious because we knew what he meant, and he was pointing something out to us.
As far as I can remember, it was Lamrim. That was the main topic. And then, after a couple of years, we started learning the preliminary practices, like Confession to the 35 Buddhas, and they didn't really emphasize the preliminaries so much, because I would meet these other Westerners who were, following other traditions, and they were already doing their 100,000 prostrations and 100,000 mandala offerings, and I felt kind of glad that I couldn't really see myself doing that. So I was really glad that we were, the emphasis was more on meditation, Lamrim meditation, because that really suited me. And so not much. I think maybe later they introduced the more philosophical studies.
Yeah, it was Lamrim and Lojong, thought training. Yeah. The philosophical stuff didn't come until much later, I think, except for our little attempt at Abhidharma. And then Vajrasattva, so, there was some Tantra involved.
Well, at that time, I think we only had the Shramanera Getzel vows, so there was a little text on the 36 vows. But I think at that point in time, nobody had taken Gelon.
No, some of the monks, the year I got ordained, some of the monks took Gelon.
Mm.
Yeah.
But I guess in the early days, there were no Gelons.
Pardon?
In the early days when I was there, the first couple of years, I don't think anyone had.
Yeah, I don't remember them giving teachings. The first teachings I remember were Geshe Nawan Darge in Dharamsala.
On the 36 vows?
On the 36.
Yeah. I mean, they probably did it before I came along.
Yeah, we learned certain things, like with the precepts, don't do that, but there wasn't a lot of in-depth explanation, I think, at the beginning.
Yeah, it seems like in the Tibetan tradition, because in the monastic curriculum, they study Vinaya at the end. That's actually usually the last thing they study. And it could be because when the monks and nuns enter, they're very young, and it may be too hard for them to study Vinaya. So they study the more philosophical studies first, and then Vinaya later. So perhaps it's because of that tradition that Vinaya wasn't so much emphasized.
Yeah, I think for the Tibetans, they picked it up just by living, because they usually went to live with their uncle or aunt, and so they just picked it up by living there. And what I heard is that they like the debating topics very much, but in Vinaya there's not much to debate, so they kind of left that. Yeah. Which, I'm glad we're changing that, at least here. So
Well, that's the Chinese tradition as well, isn't it? In the Chinese tradition, you study Vinaya first.
Yeah,
before
and
other
the Pali
things.
tradition, you study Vinaya first. But, I really, looking back on it, I really saw that, we were in one ways a wild bunch, so they didn't want to, make everything too strict. But then I also look, and there were so many things that I wish I had been taught at the very beginning that I didn't learn until I was later, and things that never entered my mind. For example, when I got ordained, the head shaving that you do that morning, I had no idea at that time that it should be a woman who shaves my head. So there was one man there, he was getting ordained too, so he shaved my head. It never dawned on me. Yeah, because, I had always grown up with men, and yeah. So there's things like that boy, I wish I had been taught beforehand. And then, some things people had to tell me what to wear, what not to wear. Again, because I was completely, in outer space about that. So looking at it now, I wish I had received kind of more specific training. I remember asking somebody to please point things out to me, and their response was, I don't like to do that because the new people don't like when people who are older point stuff out. And this person was, everybody, the oldest people who were ordained, when I was ordained, were like 3 years older than in ordination age than me, except for Max and Milan. But nobody wanted to point things out because, people often just responded with, well,
Who do you think you are? Don't tell me.
yeah. And so as a result, sometimes it was difficult to learn the things that you needed to know.
You went first.
Well, I, very contrary to how I was as a layperson, when I met the Dharma, I wanted to take precepts. I just felt like the precepts helped me so much. They were like just guiding me, and they helped me get my mind clear, and so I wanted to take precepts. At the beginning, I didn't even know there was bhikshuni ordination. All I knew was, the monks could take the second one and we couldn't, but I didn't really understand why or why not or whatever. When I heard that there was a shikshamana ordination, then a few of us, asked Lama if we could take it. And he said no. He said you don't need to. You have the bodhisattva vows. But Lekshe Soma, Venerable Karma Lekshe Soma, was a bhikshuni. And she and I were friends because we were both living in Dharamsala. And she talked to me a lot about it. What bhikshuni ordination was, and where you go, and what you do, and what the benefits are. And she offered to help me do it. But it took a long time because I wound up going to Europe first, and being in Europe, and it was 9 years between when I took the Shramaneri and the Bhikshuni. So I did a lot of other things, but it was mostly her guidance and encouragement, because she was the only one who knew what was going on and had really done it that I could remember. And there was one other Western nun that came to Dorjipomo, but she didn't know much. It was Venerable Lekshe, and then she made the connection with Venerable Hengching. Venerable Lekshe, she had been a surfer in Hawaii. Yeah, we have very interesting backgrounds. And she wound up going to Japan, and I think she got ordained in Korea, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
She did it twice.
Yeah,
One
she
in
did
Taiwan,
it twice. Yeah, once in Korea, once in Taiwan. So somewhere along there, she met Venerable Hengching. Well, she had gone to Japan and learned something, but then wound up in India. Yeah, because she and I took Shramaneri the same year, but then I was 9 years before becoming a Bhikshuni, and she somehow, went to Taiwan and took it within the next few years.
Well, it took me even longer. Because also I wasn't really aware of that possibility, but because Kamen Lecture Somo did, and then you did, so then I was thinking about it as well. And there was one time Lama Zopa Rinpoche was giving some tantric initiations, and he mentioned that in the text of Lama Tsongkhapa, he said that the best basis for practicing tantra is the vows of a bhikshu, keeping the bhikshu vows. So I thought, well, the same should apply to us, to females. And so that was a factor. But I was kind of hesitant about going to Taiwan. It sounded like it was kind of a tough, tough experience. But then I was in Bodh at one point, and in the Burmese Vihar, I saw this poster advertising the grand opening of Silai Temple in California. And I knew there was one bhikshuni from Fokwan Shan who had been studying in Dharamsala, and I knew her, and that's a branch of Fokwan Shan. So I just felt, oh wow, this would be cool. I could get bhikshuni ordination in my own country, in my own state, and that seemed much more doable than going to Taiwan, where I guess it's often not translated in your language and so on. So, so that was the thing that drew me. It was still in Chinese because the ordaining masters, they brought 10, I think it was 10 bhikshus and 10 bhikshunis over. Some were from Taiwan, some were from China. So it was conducted in Chinese, but we were given a book that had the translation, and there were classes in English. We had access to English.
But there were mostly Chinese there being ordained.
Yes, quite a few nuns came from Taiwan, from Fukwan Shan. There were some other Western nuns. There were also some Sri Lankan nuns. There were some Nepali nuns with the pink and orange. And there was one Bhutanese nun. And who else was there? Anyway, we were and they let us wear our own robes, which was also nice. So we were kind of quite a colorful group.
Yeah.
Pink and orange and maroon and gray and saffron. Huh? Only my own photo. I don't have a group photo. Yeah. Probably look it up on the website somewhere. Well, I feel kind of fortunate because the first 10 years after being ordained, I was in places where there were other Sangha and teachers. So after Kopan, I was back in America for a little while, but then I went to this center in England, and I was there for 3 years. There was a Sangha community there, and then went to France, and we tried to start a nunnery there. So it was 10 years of being with other Sangha, and then I was shipped out to being a teacher in a center, and it was tough, it was difficult. But I don't know, I guess karma, good karma, and maybe all these strong imprints from having met these wonderful lamas in India that kept me on track. But also I would go back. I didn't have a whole lot of money. It wasn't easy to travel in those days, but when I could, I would go back to India and Nepal and just reconnect with the teachers and the tradition there.
I got shipped out much earlier. I was I was really very much a baby nun. I had only been ordained, I don't know, maybe 2 years, and I was told to go to Italy. I was drinking tea, and Elizabeth walked by and said, "Lama thinks it would be really good for you to go to the Italian center," and then kept walking. And I'm like, what? What? Italy? Yeah, so I got shipped out quite early on, and I was put in. When I first arrived, there were no geshes there, so I was supposed to be the gegu for the monks, and then Nicole was supposed to come and be the spiritual program coordinator, but she didn't come, so then I had both jobs. Yeah, and there was no geshe there, and I did the 7th in prayer and the 3rd, the requesting for teachings. I really did it very sincerely again and again because I was out there, a little bit about my adventures in Italy. Yeah, and then finally Geshe Thubten came, so he started teaching. Yeah, and then where did I go after that? Then I went back to India. Yeah. And then I was in India for a little bit, and then I got sent to France when we were trying to do the nunnery there, which was quite interesting. So I've been on my own a lot, actually, in community more in the early years, and then at a certain point, very much on my own, or on my own in Dharma centers, where there weren't a lot of monastics, where I was given responsibility.
I just wanted to get enlightened. But it seems like the longer I was in the tradition, the more distant it seemed.
Yeah.
It's like in the beginning, they're all talking about, oh yes, you can get enlightened in one lifetime, and I thought, yes, I'm going to do it. But then the longer you study, the longer you practice, the more you realize it's not so easy. And then at some point, I was attending teachings by the Dalai Lama in India, and he said one day that, yeah, this talk about becoming enlightened in one lifetime, maybe 1 in a million can do that. And I really thought, oh goodness, so it was like bringing it down to earth. So yeah, I feel like I'm becoming more realistic as time goes on, still having the aspiration to practice and create the causes for enlightenment, but realizing that it's a long way off. Not easy to get there.
And it was the same for me too. It's like, I'm in India, Nepal. I'm not going back to America. It's totally corrupt there. I'm going to stay here and meditate and get enlightened. I mean, that's what all of us thought, what all of us wanted. And then the first big shock, I think, was when Lama sent Marcel off to open a business, import-export business, to benefit the Sangha. And I think Mars was as shocked as the rest of us, you know. Yeah, so my aspiration was always just to practice, you know. I never thought to teach. That was something that was pushed on me, you know. I never thought until later years to start a community. I loved living in community, but to start one and run it, that never entered my mind for a long time. At the beginning, I had no idea who the Dalai Lama was. You know, I was in Dharamsala doing the Vajrasattva retreat. People talked about the Dalai Lama. I had no idea who he was. It took me, I can't remember when I first kind of learned about who he was. Yeah. And then, you know, then I went to his teachings. Yeah, in Dharamsala, especially in Bodhgaya. You know, and so I followed his teachings and things like that. And then I had questions on karma. And I can't remember what year it was. It was very early on, because in those years, His Holiness wasn't so well known. So you could actually get an appointment to ask a Dharma question. And I went and asked my questions about karma. And I remember he called Gareth from IBD to come and translate for me, you know, because he wanted a good translator to explain this to me. And so I think that was like our first personal connection. Yeah. And then just things developed over the years.
Have you heard of Buxa? So when 1959, there was this exodus of well, His Holiness, many other monks, nuns, lay people who came out of Tibet and arrived in India, and that must have been, if you've read Geshe Zopa's biography, it's really, really horrific. So eventually, the monks, you know, they wanted to continue their studies, and the Indian government gave this place called Buxa, and it was a former prison for political prisoners, and it's in, is it Assam? It's in the eastern part of India, which apparently is very humid, hot and humid, like jungle. And so a lot of the lamas ended up there, of all traditions. You know, apparently there were Nyingmas and Sakyas, and they were all, lots of lamas living there. And I guess the conditions were quite bad. Food was bad, the weather was bad. A lot of them got sick and died. But anyway, Lama Yeshe was there, and Lama Zopa, I guess he was still quite young at that time. His story was, he had, just before this uprising in Lhasa, he was all set to go to Sera Monastery. And then suddenly that happened, that whole thing exploded, and, you know, that idea wasn't possible anymore. So I think eventually he ended up in Buxa. And he was there for, I don't know all the details, but that's where they met. I think Lama Zopa Rinpoche was studying with one person, and then that person suggested Lama Yeshe, and apparently Lama Yeshe had built this little hut for himself in the jungle outside of the main building. So Lama Zopa Rinpoche went there and met him, and I guess that's how they got connected and became a teacher and disciple. And that's just a rough bare bones of the story. But if you read the Lauda Lama, it's quite sweet, the story. His Lama Zopa Rinpoche, he said he really wanted to learn English. He had this strong wish to learn English. And there was this Frida Beatty, I don't know if you've heard of her. I never met her. She may have passed away before. She was this English woman. There's a biography.
She came to Kopan.
Frida
You weren't
Beatty?
there when she came to Kopan?
Well, maybe I was. I thought I didn't meet her.
Yeah, she came once in the early years. I
Oh,
remember
okay.
meeting her.
Anyway, she was an English woman and ended up in India and ended up becoming a nun and started a school for tulkus. Once there were all these Tibetan refugees, she thought it would be good to teach English to the tulkus. So she had a tulku school. Tulkus are reincarnated lamas. So Trungpa Rinpoche was there, and a lot of the well-known Rinpoche. So Lama Zopa Rinpoche was there for a while, started to learn English, and then he got tuberculosis, and he had to go to a hospital in Delhi and recover from that. And apparently he was still very young at that time, and I think he was crying because he really wanted to be in this school and continue his English studies. But yeah, I guess he had this this strong wish to learn English and then bring Dharma to.
Yeah. And he stayed up late at night looking in the dictionary and memorizing words. And I realized after that, because sometimes he would come out with the strangest phrase. And then years later, when I was learning Tibetan, I would look up a Tibetan word, and the word I was looking for was there. And then the other meaning of the word that Rinpoche would use that was so off was also there for the same word. And that's how, he just would look up words and memorize things. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite amazing to read about his previous life as well, because he spent like 20 years meditating in a cave, and he would, like every day, he would make these long dedication prayers, really dedicating all the merit he was creating to be able to help sentient beings and da-da-da. And then you can see in this lifetime that he's carrying out the wishes, the prayers that he made in his previous life, and just the work that he's doing is just reaching so many people, so many beings. Well, I was in this Dharma center in England, and I went there because they were starting a so-called Geshe Studies program that was Lama Yeshe's wish. He said he wanted some of his students to learn the same kind of teachings that the Geshes in the monasteries. So it was like a Geshe Studies program for Westerners. And I really wanted to study philosophy, so I was there for that purpose. But I didn't have much money. I was, really living on a shoestring. And Wisdom Publications was just starting up at that point in time, and that was the location. And so I managed to get a kind of job working for Wisdom Publications, a few hours a day, editing materials to help, offset my cost of living there. And I was happy to do that as well. I'm really happy to edit and, work on Dharma materials. So then Venerable Rabina, she wasn't the main person, but she was an important part of Wisdom Publications in those days, because her whole family she came from a family of publishers, and she was very knowledgeable about that whole aspect of things. So she asked me to put together a book of practices, meditations and prayers and so on that are used in the FPMT centers. There wasn't such a thing available. So I started working on that and just compiling all these materials and different practices and so on. Then at one point she said, I think we should make it a proper book that could be sold in bookshops, not just an internal thing, because there's a lot of interest in meditation these days and there isn't much available. So I said, okay, and I was just kind of following her ideas. And so, I started working on that, and I was bringing my own ideas in as well, because as a Westerner meeting Tibetan Buddhism, there's a big gap there often. So I would kind of rewrite meditations in words that I felt made sense to a Western person. So it took a couple of years for that whole project to come together, partly because we didn't have computers in those days. So every time we made changes, the whole thing had to be retyped. Unbelievable. Computers are amazing. So yeah, it took a couple of years, and then finally it was published. I really had no thought of writing a book, and I was just kind of amazed that it took off, and a lot of people liked it very much. And anyway, so that's how that came about. But I do like working with Dharma, of course, and I like working with words and yeah, making Dharma materials available in clear English. I was trying to do a Yamataka retreat, but 2 sessions a day, early morning and at night, and then during the day doing other things. So I remember I was sitting in my room, doing my retreat at night, and one of the other nuns knocked on my door and said, "Lama Yeshe has passed away." And I was just like, I couldn't believe it. It was just like unbelievable for me, because even though we had known for years that there was a heart condition, and the doctors had actually said many years before that he only had a year to live, but somehow I thought he couldn't die. He just seemed so full of life, so full of energy. He would just go on forever. So I just never really believed that that could happen. So it was just such a shock. It was just like the sun disappeared from the sky. I felt like that. And then we came together. The resident Lama said we should do Guru Puja. So we came to the Gomba to do Guru Puja, and I was just crying. But then later, I'm meeting one of the other nuns, the younger nuns, and talking with her about it. It occurred to me that I was extremely fortunate that I had known him for 10 years. I had had 10 years of contact with him, not every day, of course, but, over that period of time. And this young nun had only maybe known him a year or so. And it just gave me this sense that I've received something really, really precious, and I want to carry it on, and I want to pass it on to others who didn't have that opportunity. So it gave me a sense of responsibility. And I felt Lama wouldn't be happy for me to be bawling and falling apart, with sadness. So I got to get myself together and, continue practicing what he taught me and share it with others. So it really gave me a strong kind of boost of energy to do that.
For me, the Lama's death had been preceded by Chichen Rinpoche's death, Serkan Rinpoche's death, Ling Rinpoche's death, and I was at Tarpa Chuling at the time Lama died. It was Losar.
You were in Dorje Pama at that time?
I lived at Dorje Pama,
Yeah,
but I had gone to Tarpa Chuling for some teaching or something, because I was there. Song Rinpoche, that's what it was. He was teaching at Tarpa Chuling, and the phone call came to Tarpa Chuling first, because Lama was a student of Song Rinpoche, to tell him about it. And then I was told, and being the person from Dorje Pama, then I had to call Dorje Pama Nunnery and tell everybody else. And very much like SK, I was shocked, but also because I was in the position of I had to call and tell everybody else, it was like, okay, I have to be strong, because we can't all fall apart. That wouldn't be too cool, and Lama certainly wouldn't like that.
I remember too, like I mentioned earlier, I wasn't really interested in preliminary practices like prostrations and so on and so forth. But that shifted after Lama passed away. Somehow, it was almost like up until that time I was just kind of playing around, not that serious. But seeing that Lama passed, this amazing being, passed away, he could pass away, it just really brought death home to me that that's going to happen to me too. And I got to get serious about my practice. So it was from that time on that I developed an interest in doing the preliminary practices, the prostrations and so on. So that was another kind of benefit of that experience.
Yeah, it was a big thing for everybody when Lama passed away. Some people, like her, got stronger in their practice, and other people just kind of fell apart and stopped practicing, which was very sad to see, people who just figured, because it was like the refuge was in Lama first and the Dharma second. So when Lama wasn't there, then the refuge and the Dharma it waned. Which was, it was very sad to see that happen for many people, many people. But then, Rinpoche came and he became the head of the organization. And as often happens, different teachers have karma with different students. So there was a whole changeover that happened. I mean, some people who were Lama students stayed and, when Rinpoche took over, because Rinpoche directed everything in a very different way. He has a totally different personality than Lama, and different way of kind of directing and what he wanted people to learn and so on. And so some people stayed, and then some people left, and then a bunch of other new people came. And I've seen that happen, time and again when the teacher of a monastery, or something, or a center has passed away, has died, and then there's this change that happens with people. Which is why it's important that your refuge is in the Dharma, not in your teacher's personality. Lama was so charismatic that for some people the refuge, his charismatic personality carried everybody.
I saw something similar happen in Italy when Geshe Jama Gyatso passed away, because he'd been there for 25 years and traveled all over Italy, and he had so many devoted students. He was just an amazing teacher. And it seems that when he passed away, a lot of people just lost it. He was their object of refuge. He was their reason for being there and practicing Dharma. And then once he was gone, they didn't have anything to stand on, any foundation. So it sort of made me think, I don't know, when we were taught to meditate on impermanence and death, and, I'm going to die, and my parents are going to die. But there's no mention about your teacher dying. And I thought I think it'd be really helpful to use that, to meditate. My teacher is going to die too. He's not going to be there forever. She's not going to be there forever, just to prepare ourselves for that. And realize that even if they're not there anymore, I need to continue. I need to go on. I need to keep practicing. Because it can be such a shock otherwise.
Yeah, the death of my teachers has been the hardest death. My parents dying was not difficult. My teachers dying was very